This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. Netflix is home to many great stories. The horror of Stranger Things, the tension of Squid Game, the love of Queer Eye, and the relatability of Inside. However, not even The Crown or House of Cards could produce as much drama as Netflix itself in recent weeks. Netflix might be the biggest streaming service in the world, but it's in trouble at the moment, and its problems are very public, with endless articles and opinion pieces being written about the issues besetting the streaming giant. So in this video, let's unpack the problems facing Netflix, and how, ultimately, they made these problems for themselves.
When you have something that's just talked about as Squid Games and it didn't drive subs, I'm going to take my 4, 5, 6 shirt that I have, and I'm going to burn it this weekend.
By the way, if you want more videos like this, then consider subscribing to the channel. We're brand new, and we really appreciate your support. When Netflix first hyper-focused on streaming, they were pretty unique. Sure, there were other streaming sites out there, but Netflix quickly broke through as a leader in the industry, able to create original content that not only won them critical acclaim, but also loyal subscribers. However, arguably Netflix's biggest achievement hasn't been the content they've produced or the awards they've won, but what they've been able to achieve in the boardroom. That's because they were able to, and maybe still are able to, convince investors to treat them like a tech company. Now, I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but tech companies are extremely valuable. Many of the biggest companies in the world right now are in the tech sector, many boasting huge valuations. And these valuations are important because they tell the world and your investors what your business is worth. Now, calculating a business's value often feels as much like an art as it is a science. But one common practice is to use multiples. Essentially, you multiply a company's earnings by a set number to figure out their value. And in tech, that multiple can be high, often around 30, 40, or even 50 times. That means if your business is earning $1 billion a year, you could get a valuation of between $30 and $50 billion, which does make some sense. If you buy a company today, you're not just going to get their earnings from this year, you're going to collect for future years too, as well as benefiting from any growth, which in tech is generally expected to be significant. Now, the same thing is true in all industries, but the multipliers vary, and they vary a lot. For example, legacy media outlets tend to benefit from a multiplier between 5 and 15, which means that a legacy media company bringing in $1 billion is worth between 5 and 15 billion, significantly less than the tech company, which brings in the same amount of value. Again, this does make some sense. Traditional media companies may be broadly successful, but these companies are so well established and so large that no one's really expecting Disney to quadruple its size overnight in the same way that startup tech companies can. Now, while this might seem somewhat logical, the whole issue gets a little more difficult when you stop comparing fast-growing tech companies to old media giants and bring Netflix into the frame. Now, Netflix is certainly disruptive, like a tech company. It relies on vast computing power and sophisticated algorithms, like a tech company. But the question is it a tech company? Well, Netflix has done a great job of convincing investors that it is, earning them a big multiplier, which vastly inflates their value and share price. Now, when legacy outlets saw this happening, they were understandably a little frustrated. They'd argue that Netflix was just a different iteration of a media company, and that if investors allowed them to spend money hand over fist, they'd be able to pull in new subscribers just as fast as Netflix did. And that's significant too. Netflix's value allowed them far more leeway than other media companies. They might both be producing TV and films, but the traditional outlets were expected to make money, and a lot of it. But Netflix didn't really have this restriction. Sure, most years they were still making profits, but they were burning through a ton of money in order to get there. Investors weren't all that concerned though. Tech companies often don't make that much money at first, It's standard to spend a ton of money scaling and building your user base before really working out what your monetization strategy is. And as such, Netflix was able to grow rapidly and become a media darling by spending money at a rate quite unlike any other comparable company. Now, that's great news for Netflix and a real achievement, but it does also create further issues down the road. Those issues being expectations and competition. Seeing the success of Netflix and the way that Wall Street allowed them to act like a tech company, it's unsurprising that the old media giants became obsessed with them, using them as a sort of template when working out how their businesses ought to operate in the future. So, over the last few years, you've likely noticed an explosion of new players in what's been dubbed the streaming wars. A few years ago, Netflix's spending on original content looked massive when compared to other players in the industry. But today, the game has just been stepped up, with spending on content expected to hit $230 billion this year. Yep, $230 billion. That includes an estimated $15 billion for Disney+, $4 billion for HBO Max and Discovery+, $13 billion for Amazon Prime Video, $6 billion for Apple TV+, $4 billion for Paramount+, and $5 billion for Peacock. And this competition makes life difficult for Netflix on two planes: customers and content. The first is pretty obvious. I'm sure you've felt it in your life already. I think we're all becoming a little overburdened with streaming services at the moment, picking up new streamers to catch up on the latest must-see show, and then accidentally paying for a lot more than the free trial. As such, Netflix has to work a lot harder for your dollars. It's no longer trying to be an extra few bucks a month on top of your regular TV plan. It's one of many $10 a month payments draining out of your account in exchange for fun distractions. And that means that people are more likely than ever to critically consider the value that Netflix really brings to their lives. And it's not just other streaming services either. Netflix CEO Reed Hastings regularly highlights that the company's real competition is other leisure activities like gaming or even sleeping. It's not just the temptation of outdoors that's pulling people's attention away either. It's also a content issue for Netflix. With more money than ever being poured into streaming content, Netflix is no longer the standout service that everyone needs to have. I've personally found that my attention is increasingly shifting away from Netflix as the competition for content is driving the competition for users. Personally, the only thing I'm really watching on Netflix right now is Better Call Saul, and when that ends, well, I'll have to seriously consider my subscription for the first time. And this plays into the second major issue. New competitors not only make life harder when it comes to customers and content, they also make meeting investor expectations far more difficult.
Does the Netflix quarter make one wonder about how large this market really can be?
This is it. This is the bottom. Throw everything you have at Netflix. This stock was trading double the earnings multiple as Disney.
It's a zero-sum or dog-eat-dog. But
They dropped $5 billion in profit to the bottom line. Why all of a sudden ad-supported? They're desperate.
Probably the main piece of news that you've heard about Netflix recently is that they're losing subscribers. And it's absolutely true. After years of growth, Netflix experienced its first quarter of loss in Q2 2022, when 200,000 subscribers ditched their subscription, before dropping by another million in Q2. Now, that's not good news for any business, but the real problem is that Netflix has essentially pitched themselves as a tech company. It achieved its growth, its valuation, and its status by masquerading as a tech company with essentially infinite growth potential. This decline in their user base runs directly counter to that, suggesting that the number of potential subscribers may be more finite than we once thought, and the big multiplier of value might have been a touch overblown. And we saw evidence of this thinking in the company's valuation when it was first announced that they were losing subscribers earlier this year. Overnight, the valuation of Netflix crashed as it began to dawn on investors that things might not be as rosy at Netflix as it once looked. Then, at the end of July, Netflix issued its latest earnings for Q2 and revealed, as we mentioned earlier, a further 1 million people left their service. This time, though, the stock price actually rose. How does that work? How does Netflix lose subscribers but see their valuation go up? Well, as always with business, it's all about expectations. Back in the spring, when that crash happened, Netflix predicted that their subscriber count would fall by 2 million in Q2. So while the 1 million drop was bad, it wasn't as bad as investors might have feared, which led to the slight bump in value. The thing is, though, that Netflix's issues here are somewhat self-made. It rode high with the tech company style valuation, which, valid or not, angered its competitors and pulled them into streaming. That created more competition and more streaming services, who, instead of riding on Netflix's coattails and achieving higher valuations too, have seemingly just dragged Netflix down with them. It's not only bad news for Netflix, though. In their rush to streaming, the old media companies have somewhat abandoned a cash cow for them: cable packages. Streaming might be modern and cool, but at least for the moment, it's a lot more difficult to make back your money in streaming in the same way that these companies could with the old school cable bundles. Now, they hoped that any cost here could be offset by the benefits of streaming and the boost from Wall Street. But with investors looking fairly nonplussed by the whole market at the moment, it's not really done them any favors. Disney, for example, have experienced some strong subscriber growth numbers for Disney Plus, and recently announced a whole load of spending for the platform. But shares in the company have dropped 32% this year. Now, obviously, there's a whole load of extenuating circumstances, but in comparison to the huge boost that these companies hope to achieve by getting the Netflix multiple, this is quite a serious reality check. It's not all doom and gloom, though. Netflix insists that this is just a blip, and that the transition from TV to streaming is an inevitability. But it's a scary time for streaming, especially as we seem to be headed into more troubled economic times, where luxuries like streaming services might be the first thing to get cut. And maybe we should do another video on how the streaming services could save themselves. Comment below if you'd be interested. Anyway, looking at the numbers, it seems that investors and customers are getting a little sick of Netflix and saving themselves a few dollars a month by unsubscribing. And if you're looking to reinvest that money, then why not consider the 50th biggest streaming service in the world, our streaming service, Nebula. Over there, you can watch a whole load of exclusive TLDR videos, including early access to our first 4 TLDR business videos before anyone else. Not only that, but all of our videos are entirely ad-free, so no more skipping ads or hearing me promote stuff. But how much is that worth? Early access to videos, exclusive videos which never make it to YouTube, and ad-free viewing. How does $15 a year sound? No, really. That's because we've done a deal with CuriosityStream. So if you sign up to their superb service, where you'll find tons of high-quality documentaries, you'll also get Nebula, our streaming service, totally free. That means if you sign up using the link below, you'll get both services for just over $1 a month. A crazy good deal. That's because we've done a deal with CuriosityStream. So if you sign up to their superb service, well, you'll find tons of high-quality documentaries, then you'll also get Nebula, our streaming service, totally free. That means that if you sign up using our link, you'll get both services for just over $1 a month. Thanks for your support.